I'm Ron Patterson with Utah State University Extension. Today we're going to plant beans. Part of your preparation for planting beans will be to get some fertilizer down and to put down 2 or 3 inches of compost and work that into the soil. Now the recommendation is about 1 pound of 16-16-8 all-purpose fertilizer for 100 square feet of garden space. So I've got about 100 square foot area here, and I've weighed out a pound of fertilizer. Now if you don't have a scale to weigh out a pound, a general rule of thumb, depending on how this fertilizer is prepared, but a good rule of thumb is 1 pint equals 1 pound. My dad had a saying, a pint's a pound the world round. So if 2 cups will give you about a pound of fertilizer. So you want to work your fertilizer and your compost down into the soil a little bit if you can. I'm just going to rake mine in because I've already got my compost and everything tilled in. I'm just raking in a little bit of fertilizer here. Now the size of the seed will help you determine how deep to plant it. So when the seed's laying like that, the bean seed's about 1/4 of an inch thick, and so if you make your furrow about 4 times the thickness of the seed, that will give you how deep to go. And so 1/4 of an inch 4 times be about 1 inch. So you want to plant your beans about 1 inch, probably no deeper than 1.5 inches, but it's kind of a rule of thumb. 1 inch of soil on your trench, and basically you're covering it with 3 times the soil depth of the seed. So that's how you determine how deep to plant your seed. Now it's important to make sure that you have enough moisture for the seeds to germinate, and so after I've made my furrows, I like to run a little bit of water in there. If you've had a lot of rain, you may not need to do this, but here in dry country Utah, I don't count on the rain very often, and so I want to make sure that I get enough moisture in my furrows so that after I plant my seeds, they've got enough moisture to germinate and grow. And so if there's enough moisture there, I probably won't have to water again until after the seeds pop up. There's another reason for not watering after you've planted the beans until they've actually emerged. Beans are very tender, and a lot of times if you've got a heavy soil, this portion, either the cotyledons or even the plumule and the epicotyl, will break off, and you'll get the bean plant will slow down. This one here has broken off. The soil kind of held on to it and it broke off. Now there are buds here. It will grow and produce beans, but it's been slowed way down as opposed to these that have emerged properly. So the cotyledons, which are the seed leaves on beans, will come out of the ground. If the ground is holding it, you get the crust forming, and on the soil, it will sometimes just rip those cotyledons off. But in this case, even it ripped off here at the epicotyl. This portion from the cotyledons to the leaves, to the true leaves, is called the epicotyl, and that's been broken off because the ground was hanging on to that as it was trying to open up and broke those off. So it's good to put some water in the furrow when you're planting, and then cover it with dry soil, and hopefully you'll get your germination and the bean emergence before you have to water. After they've emerged, you should be fine. There's no problem. It's just that emergence, that very tender tissue, breaks off sometimes. Now these are bush beans, and bush beans can be fairly tightly planted. They're going to get up about 18, maybe 24 inches tall, and then they produce quite heavily, and then they stop producing it quite so heavily. The nice thing about beans is that you can succession plant them. You can plant them every 2 to 3 weeks and get a good heavy crop out of your beans about every 2 or 3 weeks. You can do that up until about the middle of July. For seed placement and spacing, beans they do fairly well with crowding, but generally if you're going to do 1 row type system, if I were going down my bed here instead of across, I would go a row or maybe a double row, and then 18 to 20 inches between the rows, 18 to 24, and then between each row. Because I'm going across here on my wide bed, I don't need to have the pathway type system, and so I'm going to plant them about 12 inches apart, the rows about 12 inches apart, and then the spacing of the seeds within the rows 2 to 4 inches. So that's how I'm going to be planting these. These are a little bit older, so I'm going to go to the 2-inch spacing on these seeds. Alright, now you've got the seeds planted. You want to cover them over about 3/4 to an inch of soil on top of the seed. And then tamp it down so that you got good seed to soil contact. In about 7 to 10 days, you should have the seeds popping up out of the ground. Now, beans are a tender plant. They do not tolerate frost at all. And so you want to make sure that you plant them when there's very little, if any, chance of frost. You may have to replant if they get frozen. A little bit of frost and it'll damage or kill your beans very easily. So, generally speaking, you can plant maybe a week before your average last frost date. If you're a little bit nervous about that, you can plant a little bit later, but the soil temperature needs to be up around 70 degrees in order for the seeds to germinate well. There are two different types of growth habits with beans. There's the bush bean, which gets 18 to 24 inches tall, which you can pack in pretty tight. Then there's the pole bean. You can plant them the same spacing, but they want to grow up, and they'll have a longer production season. They won't give you that big flush of production at one point. They'll give you a good production over the entire season. So succession planting is not as critical with pole beans as it is with bush beans, but you want some sort of a structure to support these. They'll grow up this twine just fine. So here on my trellis, I've got about every 6 inches or so, I've got twine across there for those pole beans to go and trellis up and have a good production through the summer. Fresh beans from the garden are delicious. Much better than anything you can buy at the store. So there you have it. Just one more way to have fun in your garden.